Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, MTG. For today's video, we'll be going over the first 10 officially spoiled cards from Ravnica Allegiance, which comes out on January 19th. I'm pretty excited for it. Guilds of Ravnica was a fun time, and I think Ravnica Allegiance is going to be equally as fun. So I'm really excited for this set, and I'm really excited to talk about these cards with you guys, because some of them are pretty good and have some solid implications on Eternal formats already, and it should be a fun video talking about some of these cards. But before we do get into the video, I just want to say thank you. For those of you who saw the update post, whether it was on Twitter or whether it was here on YouTube, I received so many, sorry for your loss, condolences with your family, messages like that. Really means a lot, and I just wanted to say thank you. It truly means the world to me that I have people like this who, have never, we've never interacted like, face to face or anything like that, but I've managed to build this incredible community here that for some reason supports me, and I'm greatly appreciative of it. And it was tremendous seeing the support that you guys are willing to give me on this weekend and stuff. So I'm again very thankful. And yeah, with that being said, we'll go ahead and talk about some Magic cards now. So first one we have here is going to be your store championship promo, Lavinia, Azorius, Renegade. For 1 white and 1 blue, you get a 2/2 legendary creature human soldier. Each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of lands that player controls. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. So Lavinia has some pretty big implications in Eternal formats, because when we think about Legacy and we think about Vintage, a card that's very well known within those formats is the card Force of Will, which Lavinia stops Force of Will, which is very important. So you might see these Death and Taxes strategies in the Legacy format maybe start pushing towards a little bit of a blue splash in it as well, instead of just the mono white. The mono white version, has cards in it like Thalia already, which is a good taxing card, and then has additional cards like Stoneforge Mystic to finally end the game, those sort of things. So I think Lavinia could be a decent little addition to those strategies, especially if you're looking to just stop all the blue Force of Will decks. And then also, even for Modern, it says each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of lands that player controls. So when we think about the Tron lands in Modern, your opponent can no longer cast their Karn, can no longer cast their Ugin, unless they have the proper number of lands in order to be able to cast it. And because the Tron decks don't really run a ton of removal outside of something like Oblivion Stone, then it's gonna be pretty hard for them to remove Lavinia. Of course, Wormcoil Engine is a card that they can still cast with their Tron mana because it is a creature spell and not a non-creature spell. So this is a pretty good one. Another thing to kind of keep into consideration as well is Legacy Storm too. When you think about the Storm decks that are trying to kill you on turns 2, maybe turn 1 sometimes in Legacy, and the Eternal formats like that, it's going to be hard for them to do that because they'll only have 1 or 2 lands in play, and so they'll need to spend some number of spells to remove Lavinia before they can actually storm off. It should be a pretty sweet a little addition here to see where it ends up. I think for the store championship promo, this is a very good choice. Having Lavinia, Amara was the other one that they chose for Guilds of Ravnica as the store championship promo. Again, I think that was a fantastic choice. But Lavinia is going to be more for Eternal formats, while Amara is doing her thing in Standard. So I think these are great choices. I think Lavinia is a really solid card, and it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with her in especially the Eternal formats. Next up, we have Rix Maddie Reveler. 2 mana 2/2 with the Spectacle mechanic, which we saw one card previously spoiled with the Spectacle mechanic, which we'll actually talk about later, but I'm sure you guys have seen it on other channels already. So the Spectacle mechanic says that you may cast the spell for its Spectacle cost rather than its mana cost if an opponent lost life this turn. And so what we have here for Rix Maddie Reveler is you could either just cast this as a 2/2 for 2, and then when it enters the battlefield, you discard a card, then draw a card. Pretty simple. And then you have the ability to cast it for its Spectacle cost, which would mean that it would be 2 colorless, a black, and a red for a 2/2, that when it enters the battlefield, you discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. So the Spectacle cost gives you something else that you can do additionally, like here with the Rix Reveler. Here with the Raptor Demon as well. This is another card with the Spectacle mechanic that they showed off today. 4 mana for a 4/2, or you can use the Spectacle to pay 5 mana, and then when it enters the battlefield, if its Spectacle cost was paid, each opponent discards a card. So that's a pretty sweet one as well. I think what we're going to end up seeing is that the cards that are really crazy with Spectacle are going to be the ones that actually have less mana for their Spectacle cost than they do for their regular converted mana cost, or if they have a really powerful effect. So when we talk about a card that we've seen previously, spoiled, I believe, yesterday, or I guess it was technically leaked a while ago, but officially spoiled yesterday. Light Up the Stage here. 3 mana, 2 colorless and a red for a sorcery with the Spectacle mechanic. Exile the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. So for this card, it actually has less of a Spectacle cost than it does for its original CMC, which is, I think, a really good little design strategy that they have here, where they could either tack on additional value and then up the Spectacle cost, or they could just reduce the Spectacle cost but keep the card effect the same. So I think what you're going to end up seeing is, like these creatures here, you're going to see some sort of an ETB effect happen with a higher Spectacle cost than the regular CMC, and then for the instants and sorceries, you're going to see a lower Spectacle cost on the instants and sorceries that do the same effect. So I think that's a pretty sweet design mechanic that they have here with Spectacle. This is kind of what we were expecting Spectacle to be. It was supposed to be, really Rakdos themed, and I think a lot of people were able to guess this one pretty easily because it just kind of fits what Rakdos is trying to do. The next card we have here is going to be the League promo, and that is Gate Colossus here, an 8 mana 8/8 uncommon. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each gate you control, and then Gate Colossus can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. And then it also has the ability that whenever a gate enters the battlefield under your control, you may put Gate Colossus from your graveyard on top of your library. This card's going to be very, very powerful and limited. I'm not sure if it's going to be great in, Constructed. I think making it a League promo is a little ambitious, thinking that it'll do something in Constructed, but maybe we'll see something with, like, Circuitous Route and then a bunch of gates, and it's trying to just, like, ramp out Gate Colossus for very cheap. Because if your first, 4 lands are gates, then 4 mana 8/8 that can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less on turn 4, or I guess turn 5 since they enter tap, but that's still, pretty solid. Or you could even, like, live the dream and go, like, turn 4, let's say you have 3 gates in play, right? And then your 4th land is just like a basic. You play Circuitous Route, put 2 more gates into play, so you now have 5 gates. You then can play an additional gate then on your next turn, and then you have 6 gates in play, and then you're looking at Gate Colossus only casting 2 mana, so then you can cast multiple Gate Colossi in one turn. It'd be pretty sweet. So maybe there is some implications for it in Constructed, but I think what you're really going to see is people drafting, Gate Colossus fairly highly and then picking up a ton of gates to make the Gate Colossus really work. You're most likely never casting the Gate Colossus for 8 mana. If you're casting Gate Colossus for 8 mana, you probably drafted incorrectly. Either that or just couldn't find any gates, but even at that point, I don't think you actually want to play the Gate Colossus then, if you don't have enough gates to really make it work. But it definitely seems like a sweet card for draft. Maybe has some Constructed implications now that I think about it a little bit more, but I'm kind of doubt it. Maybe more of like a budget strategy. Maybe we could do some sort of a deck tech here on the channel where you're trying to ramp out your gates, cards like District Guide, Circuitous Route, and then 4 Gate Colossus. I think that'd be a pretty sweet one. Maybe we can do some brewing with that one. So those are the cards from today that were spoiled. These other ones are cards that you may have already seen, but we're still going to talk about them anyway because I didn't get a chance to talk about them previously. So first up is the Buy a Box promo, which is the Haunt of Hightower. 6 mana for a 3/3 legendary creature vampire, flying lifelink. Whenever the Haunt of Hightower attacks, defending player discards a card. And then whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you put a +1/+1 counter on the Haunt of Hightower. So this card's pretty sweet. Whenever they cast, like an instant or sorcery, for example, that card does its effect and then goes into the graveyard, which means you then get a trigger to put a +1/+1 counter on it. If you run some sort of mill effects in Standard, like I did a Dominaria draft the other day. They have Homerid Explorer in that set, which is 4 mana for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, target player mills the top 4 cards. So if you have the Haunt of Hightower out and then play the Homerid Explorer, then you're gonna go ahead and put 4+1/+1 counters on the Haunt of Hightower right away, which is pretty sweet. There's obviously better ways to mill your opponent than Hammered Explorer, but it was the first one that came to mind. You could run things like Psychic Coercion from M19, Patient Rebuilding as well. So there might be a little bit of a blue-black mill strategy that also has the Haunt of Hightower in it, as well as, you know, kind of a way to make it so that your opponent can't just board out all their removal against the mill deck. Could definitely be something that would be pretty sweet to see, and I'm kind of interested in it. I'm not sure that it's you know, a very good card. Most of the buy box promos have just kind of been like, you know, meh. Like, this reminds me more of Impervious Great Worm than it does of Nexus of Fate. Alright, my apologies, my voice started to give out on me a little bit there, but that's basically the gist of Haunt of Hightower. It seems like it'll be a pretty fun one. If you end up buying a box, you know, then this won't be the worst card, but again, it does remind me more of the Impervious Great Worm, where it really only fits into like one kind of strategy. It'll be much more of a casual card than, you know, something with competitive implications or anything like that. Next up, we have Mortify, which is a reprint here from a previous set, and this is going to be an F&M promo. 1 colorless mana, or 1 generic mana, a white, and a black for an instant, destroy target creature or enchantment. I love Mortify. This card's great. Happy to see it back in Standard. I'll probably end up putting together some sort of a black-white control list that I'll end up playing, you know, at some point throughout Standard. Black-white control has been one of my favorite archetypes ever since I've started playing, basically since Eldritch Moon was when I first started. Yeah, Eldritch Moon was when well, not when I first started playing Magic. I first started back in Dragons of Tarkir, but when I first found black-white control and how much I really enjoyed that archetype, it was around the Eldritch Moon time period, and I really like Mortify. It's a strong one. Fits that sort of a strategy that I really like. So I'm sure I'll do some fun stuff with Mortify. Good little reprint to see back in Standard as well. We do have things like Murder already in Standard, which are like these 3 mana instant, you know, removal spells. But the ability to remove enchantments is pretty important actually, because we've seen Conclave Tribunal seeing a ton of play in Standard. We have cards like Ixalan's Binding, Seal Away. Those kind of cards are also still in Standard. When we think about the sagas, those are also enchantments as well, so something like the Eldest Reborn, Mortify could take care of that one before they reanimate something crazy on the 3rd chapter, so having Mortify back in Standard is pretty sweet, and I'm happy to see it here. Next up is the Open House promo, which will be Rakdos Firewheeler. This is kind of in the same cycle that cards like Nightveil Predator and Crackling Drake were from. So Rakdos Firewheeler, 2 black, 2 red for a 4/3. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to target opponent and 2 damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. This card, I feel like, is on the weaker end of the spectrum in terms of competitive play when we think about that cycle. At least we've seen something like we've seen Crackling Drake everywhere, but even cards like the Boros one, you have the Starve Extinction combo to play with that. The Nightveil Predator sometimes sees some sideboard play in the Dimir control decks. I don't see Rakdos Firewheeler doing any of that, but for limited, it's a pretty solid card. Definitely a pretty reasonable uncommon for you to pick up in limited if you're choosing to play the Rakdos color combination. Rakdos is generally more aggressive, so this is going to be something to kind of, you know, top out your curve for the Rakdos strategy. So I think it's pretty solid for limited, but I don't see any constructed implications for Rakdos Firewheeler. Next up, we have Growth Spiral, which again is another F&M promo, and this is probably going to be my favorite card in the set, just because it does nothing, and I love cards that do that. 1 green, 1 blue for an instant. Draw a card. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. This is going directly into Tatayova Commander decks, which I personally don't play a ton of Commander, but when I do, I borrow my friend's Tatayova deck and just try to mill myself out as fast as possible. Growth Spiral fits perfectly into that strategy, so I'm kind of excited for it for Commander purposes. I don't think it'll spawn anything in Constructed. It depends on what else we're gonna see in these blue-green color combinations, but you know, Bant Turbo Fog was a thing for a while. This would be the kind of card that would possibly fit into that sort of a strategy again if we were to bring that back. So maybe we'll see something like that return. I kind of doubt it, but if we were to see a return, maybe like some sort of a Bant ramp deck as well, you could see Growth Spiral showing up in that sort of a strategy too. Next up, we have Simic Ascendancy, which is a green and a blue for an enchantment. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control for 3 mana, a 1 colorless blue and a green. So 3 mana for a +1/+1 counter on a creature. Not too bad, but it's an enchantment, so you can recur it over and over again. Whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. So this card's pretty sweet in the fact that it is an engine for itself. You could just eventually pay the 3 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on something to get the growth counter on Simic Ascendancy, or just by playing throughout the course of the game, you could eventually end up putting growth counters on your thing as well. I'm thinking of cards like Mana Gorge or Hydra, which get a +1/+1 counter on them for each spell that are cast, that either player casts, or I guess any player casts, because in Commander the thing just gets huge. So Simic Ascendancy plus Mana Gorge or Hydra and those sort of cards could be quite a fun one, because it says at the beginning of your upkeep, if Simic Ascendancy has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. So of course, any card that says you win the game on it is automatically going to be a fan favorite, and I think Simic Ascendancy will be no different. This is the kind of card that I think is pretty sweet. I'm interested to see if they're going to do the rest of the Ascendancy cycle. We've seen in the past with Khans of Tarkir, we saw like Abzan, Jeskai, Mardu, those sort of ascendancies. We saw those in the past where they were a cycle of enchantments. We didn't see in Guilds of Ravnica, we didn't see the other 5 ascendancies. There was no cards like that, so I'm kind of interested to see whether Simic Ascendancy is just going to be by itself, or whether we're going to see the additional ascendancies for all of these other colors, and then maybe in the 3rd Ravnica set, then we'll see the other 5 ascendancies. I think it'll be pretty interesting to see. I think Simic Ascendancy is quite the fun one. I think it depends on what we're going to see, with the rest of the +1/+1 counter shenanigans that we have here in Standard. I'm thinking of maybe something like Merfolk, where you have cards like Deeproot Elite to put +1/+1 counters on all your other Merfolk whenever something enters. That goes really well with a card like River Herald's Boon, which can put 2 +1/+1 counters out, which also puts 2 growth counters on your Simic Ascendancy. So it provides you with sort of a backup win condition, as well as a way to just grow your creatures so you can win the damage race as well. Goes really well with a card like Hadana's Climb as well from Rivals of Ixalan. So I think that there's some potential for a +1/+1 counters deck here in Standard, especially with Hadana's Climb. That card is great, and I think that since we're seeing +1/+1 counters as a kind of a theme here for Simic, it'll be interesting to see what mechanic they end up bringing, because right now the only mechanic that we actually know from the set is Spectacle, which again we talked about earlier. So for Simic, we don't know any of the other ones, and Simic might end up being Graft, which cares about +1/+1 counters, or it could end up being Evolve again, which was something else that cared about +1/+1 counters. So it's definitely possible that Simic Ascendancy, or that the Simic theme in general, could be the one callback that they have to a previous, to a previous keyword that they had for some of these cards in the set. So I'm pretty excited for the set, even though this is only 10 cards. I think there's some pretty sweet stuff here. Kind of gives us a decent little insight on what we might be seeing here in Ravnica Allegiance, and I'm pretty excited. So hopefully you guys are excited as well. I think this is going to be a pretty sweet set. Let me know your thoughts on all the cards. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions on some of these cards? Definitely let me know. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you guys want to see more content like this in the future, and I'll see you guys here next time. Thank you guys so much for watching me go over my opinions on the first 10 officially spoiled cards from Ravnica Allegiance. At the end of all of my videos, I love to give a huge shout out and thank you to my patrons over on the Patreon page. So huge shout out and thank you to Jeremy, Rodrigo, Jason, Daniel, Battle of MTG, Down Under MTG, and Jayati Swaran for supporting me on the Patreon page. Their support is greatly appreciated, as well as the support of all of you as well, just for watching. And again, I would like to say thank you for all the kind comments that I've received over the past few days. It means the world to me, and I'm truly appreciative. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for all the kindness and support that you show me, and I'll see you guys here next time.